Hello everyone and welcome to Gamers Diamond. In this video I'm going to be talking about the recording requirements and tips and tricks for Geometry Dash competitions. Now to start things off, of course, you have to follow the rules of the game. And what I mean, I have the competition rules in the Discord server for Geometry Dash. All of those rules have to be followed or else your recording will of course automatically be invalid. Now the number one thing is that you cannot play in full screen mode. And the reason why you can't play in full screen mode is because since in this competition, all players are not being live streamed because we're dealing with a large amount of players. And then, of course, everyone can't live stream. It'll be a complete nightmare trying to live stream everyone and force them to do that. So you record your video. Now, of course, people can try to make pre-recorded videos of them beating a list or them beating a specific level, a specific amount of time. So we have to be able to see their timer in real time. And what I mean by timer, I meant to say clock. You have to be able to see their clock down here in real time. Now, of course, if you're on PC or on computer, make sure, of course, you're not in full screen mode and make sure your clock can be seen. Now, if you're on mobile, of course, there is no getting out full screen mode on mobile. And basically what you have to do that little thing where you swipe and you see the clock. That has to be shown at the beginning of your recording, and that also has to be shown at the end of your recording. And it has to actually match up, of course. So people might still try to do pre-recorded things depending on what time the competition starts at, but that will have to be shown at the beginning and at the end of the competition. Now there is one way to get around full screen. Let's say you're on a lower end device or you simply like full screen, because most people, of course, they play in full screen. So there's only one way to avoid this, and this is by having a real life camera that's recording you. Now I know a lot of people don't want to do this for certain reasons. You may just not want to set up a camera. It's because it takes a lot of space on your camera, or you just don't want to be seen. Now, first of all, one thing is that your videos will be private unless you want them to be seen by the server. For example, I might want to post the winners of the competition, but if you don't want your footage to be seen, it's completely fine and it can stay private. No one else will see it except for me or the moderators who are checking the videos. Now, of course, if you do decide to have full screen on and you do the external recording approach, you need to have a clock and digital clock. We're not going to be trying to read your analog clock that's all the way on the far side of your room. We're not going to be reading that. We need a digital clock that is visible, a digital clock, and the time has to be matching. For example, I'm in the Eastern time zone, but your time has to be matching up with my time zone depending on where you are. So those are the full screen requirements, and basically we need to see your clock. And another thing is we need to see your username at least once during the recording, because people might try to do things with different accounts and it's just weird. People can try to find different ways to cheat, and at this moment I can't really think of exactly what I thought about, but trust me, there's ways for people to try to cheat and exploit the competition if you cannot see what user they are. So we need to be able to see your username at least once during the run. Now here are some tips and tricks for recording, especially when you're on a low end device, because one thing is there are many people who want to compete in these competitions who have lower end devices. Now what do? Now I'm specifically talking to the computer players, but this can still apply depending on your mobile recorder. Now when you're on computer, there are requirements. First of all, you have to have a minimum of 30 FPS on your recording. Your recording must be visible. Of course, it must be decently visible. It doesn't have to be 4K or super high quality, but it needs to be visible enough where we can see what's happening in the level. And also, you need to have a decent enough audio quality where we can hear the clicks, and they can't be massively delayed. So that is the requirements. Now another thing is you can just decrease the overall quality of your video. You can decrease it to make it look a little bit fuzzier, look a little bit blurrier. And if you're unsure whether or not it's acceptable, you can simply send it to me or moderators in the future, and I'll check it to see whether or not it's a yes or a no, whether or not that quality is acceptable. So basically what you want to do, turn down your settings to 30 FPS, and then also decrease the quality of your audio and your video as much as you possibly can. That's acceptable. So that's what you should do for low end devices. Another thing that you should do for low end devices, and even if you're not low end, this could help, is stay at a stable FPS. And what do I mean by this? Right now I've met FPS capped at 360. If I go into my settings and then I go into graphics, I go into advanced, you'll see this is the FPS cap down here. And this is basically, you're telling the game what's the highest FPS that you can be at. Now, for me personally, when I'm recording, actually this is not a good value when I'm recording, because what Geometry Dash does is when you're at a part of the stage that doesn't use up that many resources, it'll make your FPS go as high as it possibly can, for example 360. But when you get to another part of the stage that has more objects on the screen, there's more effects on the screen, it'll start to lower. And when this happens, your FPS is constantly fluctuating, which makes it extremely hard to play the game and makes it unpredictable. You start missing inputs because the FPS is just constantly fluctuating. So basically what you want to do, you can do two things. The simple fix is you could use vertical sync, and this will automatically cap your FPS at 60 no matter what. No matter what this is, it'll cap your FPS at 60. And that's pretty good for most people. Most people can have a stable 60 FPS that they'll always be at. And this is good. Now another thing, if you don't want to be at 60, you can slowly increase the FPS value and keep testing out your recording until you're at a spot where you can play all the levels of the competition at a stable FPS. For example, you might not be able to play stable at 240, but you may be able to play at a stable 120 FPS. I recommend that you do this, especially if you're really serious about competing, you're really serious about winning it. You want to have your stable FPS as high as you possibly can, because of course there's less delay. But if you can't, of course you want to turn vertical sync on, and it'll cap it at 60 for you automatically. I don't recommend you use smooth fix, because as the game gets slower, if you use smooth fix, you'll see the game will actually start to slow down. And of course, if you're doing a competition where you need to beat the level as fast as possible, which is basically all competitions, you're not going to want to be slowing down at any part of the level. So basically, turn vertical sync on, or just test out different FPS values depending on your device. And that's how you can still record and get the most out of your computer or whatever device you're on if you're on a low-end device. And that concludes the recording requirements and the tips and tricks for recording.